Okay, so today what we're going to do is we're going to cover a little bit of website design and an introduction to HTML, CSS, and PHP. We're going to primarily focus for this tutorial on the PHP side with light touches of HTML and the CSS. All of these are very large topics, so what we're going to do is we're going to split this down into 3 sections. And for the PHP side, which will be our primary focus, we'll be doing this by creating a website and building out sort of an order form slash eventually shopping cart, and then also user manageability. So we'll do just a very brief 50,000 foot overview of the building blocks of a lot of modern web design. And this is going to be building upon the LAMP stacks that we created in the past 2 videos. So after creating those LAMP stacks, we have all the backend support or infrastructure ready for us to begin building our own website. The only thing that would be missing would be the security aspects, which is going to be outside the scope of this training, but something that it would definitely be required if you ever want to do your own professional website. So doing things like SSL and making sure that that's running so your information is encrypted over the server. But for just basic design and website setup, this should be hopefully a good overview to get people started. And also, as always in the blog, I'll put more links for additional information of where to find more info. So part 1, which is going to be this video, is going to be sort of a beginning introduction of using MySQL for connecting to a database using PHP. So what this is going to do is using HTML, we're going to capture input data from an HTML form. We're going to take that data, assign it to PHP variables, and then using the MySQL method or function in PHP, we're going to then send that data to the database that we created, and then we're going to display the information. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a very basic order form, and I'm going to run through how that was created. Then we're going to build upon this in the next video, which will be sort of fine-tuning and giving it a more visual appealing design and adding the semblance of a shopping cart. And then in part 3, we're going to talk about adding user accounts and building more of a back-end management platform for the website. So part 2 and 3, I'm still actually building the design right now, so won't be showing it in this video too much, but we're going to focus on a very stripped down website so that hopefully you can get a nice understanding of the basics and how just using the basic text, how that would appear on screen without all the fancy formatting and so on. So we'll talk about more of the formatting and stuff in part 2. So 50,000 foot or 50,000 mile, whatever it is, extremely high level structure. So inside of any sort of website, you could think of this as a pyramid, you could think of these as building blocks, but essentially HTML, which stands for Hypertext Markup Language, has been the building block for designing web pages since the founding of the internet. HTML is a tagged-based language, so all elements are represented by using tags. It makes it a can be very easy to get started with, but can also get very complex and very tricky as the websites sort of get more and more design intensive and have more and more content, so it becomes very difficult to keep track of tags. That and also adding additional features and some sort of interactive aspects to the design, like on mouse hover, you know if your mouse is hovering over an icon, change the background color or something like that. For those reasons, things like CSS, cascading style sheets were designed and were built to allow users a little bit more flexibility for separating out all the design elements from the actual structure of the website. And I did spell essentially wrong there, sorry about that. But with CSS, essentially what you can do is you can put all your design elements and the features, how you want the website to look for each individual tag into a separate section of the text. Using PHP, we can even set that out and separate that out into separate files, and we can show that in we'll show that a little bit more in part 2. And then for the backend, the logic, some of the handling of the variables and things like that, that's where we use PHP. You can also do this with JavaScript, with jQuery, with a whole host of other features. There are other platforms out there like Django, which allow you to use Python essentially to do the backend logic and stuff. But for our purposes and what I've sort of worked on in the past year or so when learning PHP, it's just been the PHP side, and it can be very powerful just for creating a basic web flow, and also because it allows us to interact with the database, then we can store data persistently, which makes it so that we can have something where we have an interactive website, which is then storing data and managing users and so on and so forth. Anything that we can put into the database, we can essentially then grab with PHP and then create logic and features and form around the information as is presented onto the website. So for this part 1, these are the sort of the key things that we're going to focus on. We're going to look at using a form. Now the form is going to be purely HTML. This tag over here, this form tag, is an HTML. But what it does is you put in action, then you target the web page, and you have the method, which is post, which means when you put something into post, essentially it gets cached in the web browser. And then using PHP, we can then grab information that's sent to us in the form, assign PHP variables to it, and then we can echo back that content, and then we can use MySQLi plus query, this thing over here, to then pass this information over to our MySQL database, and we can then better interact with the entire website. So what I'm going to do right now is first show the website. So this is going to be part 2. What we're going to do right now is work on a very simple website, just a pizza order form. Okay, so obviously this is not a usable website. We don't have any selection of what pizza types are available. We don't know what toppings are available. We don't know the price. But what we do have is just a basic form which we can enter and interact with and send these orders to the database. We then also have a page here to view orders. So you can see, we have this order number, we have the customer, they give us their address, we have the order date, we have the price of the pizza. This is all the information that we sent to the database, this new order. So let's just sort of see how this works. We'll just enter in a name. Maybe we say we've got Bob, and his address is 76 New Lane or something. And Bob, he likes the Meat Lovers pizza. Any extra toppings? Bob wants to put, I don't know, maybe he wants to put broccoli. And then we'll say the price. Maybe for the extra topping, it's an extra $1.50, and the pizza was 20, so it's $21.50 or something. Again, this is just made up numbers. The order date, we can pick a date. When do we want the pizza ordered? This would maybe then say desired delivery date or something like that, or desired delivery time. Inside the HTML form, all of this calendar, this nice neat little pop-up, this is actually handled by the browser. So when you just tell the browser, hey, this type of input's a date type of input, and I'll show this in a second in the code, it knows that, okay, well, I'm going to pop up a little date box so people can pick a date. So we'll just pick a date. Then we submit. Okay, and then we have this output over here. This is going to talk and go into this echo command, which basically returns output from PHP. It basically gives us information of what was inputted. So we'll go back. So insert into orders. So we're inserting, we're running this command. This is our query. This tag right here is actually a SQL command. So in SQL, when you want to interact with a SQL or MySQL database, you have to give it a certain command to insert information or values into the orders page or into the orders database. So this insert into orders is the name of our table. And then we're putting in the customer, the address, the pizza type, the extra toppings, the price, the order date, the order number. And the values for all of these different sections is Bob, 76 New Lane, Meat Lovers, Broccoli, 2150 is the price. The date, the order date is this, and then this order number is actually just a random number. We used PHP to just create a random number, which essentially assigns an order number. We connected to the MySQL database. You selected the pizza database, and you successfully entered Bob Meat Lovers into the database. Okay, so what we have here and what would have been needed before we can actually run that. And so I'm just going to show this. Remember, this is Phpmyadmin. This is a management platform for us to interact with databases, create new tables. What you can see here is this right here is our database. So we got lots of different databases just for testing and so on. So we selected inside this MySQL server, we're selecting this pizza database, and then we're putting information into this table orders. So if we click on orders, we can see this is all the orders that we have over here. So we have this new one, it's inserted correctly, that worked. And right here we can see that the structure of this is the same as what we showed into the SQL command. So customer address, pizza type, extra toppings, etc. Customer address, pizza type, extra toppings, price, order date, order number. So we have to give all these variables into the pizza database in the orders table of pizza database. And then assuming no problems and everything checks out, then the order goes in, and now it's part of our database. Now it's up to us to figure out how do we interact with that, or how do we create more logic around that, and that's something that we're going to build out as we go through these templates. But let's first look at the code. So this essentially, the pizza order form website just shown essentially consists of 3 web pages. We have the order form. Now the order form is just pure HTML. There's no PHP required to create this order form. You have just this HTML head. You have a header, which we include the title. This is the pizza order form. The pizza order form, where the header is right here. This pizza order form. It's the title of a site. It just shows up over here. So Joe's Coffee Shop will be the title of that other site that we just clicked on over here. So you can see that. The information submitted is all over here. That's all in the form. So we can, put the code and the output right next to each other, so maybe give you a better idea. This H3 is a header 3. It essentially gives us this bigger text view. Now, we didn't add any styles or any fonts or anything to this. That would have been the CSS side of this, but this is just a very, very basic HTML site. So all that we're doing is just putting in the plain text. The browser is using its default font, and this is an H3, so this is just the header. Then we have 2 links. In HTML, what this P does is it stands for a paragraph. So we're saying, okay, we're creating a new paragraph underneath this header. There's going to be a link over here, which is this A, and then the hyperlink reference, or the link of what we're going to, this href equals the pizza order form.html. That just means when we click on new order, and this is the value shown in the text. So this is a link, and then we end the link with this A. So that means in the website we're going to display this new order, and if you click on it, it will go to this web page, which is on our website, this exact page, the pizza order form. If we click over here on view orders over here, that would be the next link over, so that would be the view orders page that we just showed, and we'll look at that in just a moment. The form here, we create a new form. Again, we're saying in this form, when we hit submit, the submit button of this form, which is down here, value submit, take this action, which means take this information, put it into the browser post, and then bring up this next site. Okay, so we're going to take all this information, we're going to put it into the browser post, and we're going to bring up the submit pizza order, which is what we just did when we went forward over here. So insert into orders, this is the submit pizza order form. Okay, so all the information over here. We have the various different input types. Each input has a name. This name allows us to interact with the information given to us in post. So for example, or sort of to explain this a little bit more, the name of this input allows us to identify when we get that name or when we try to grab that variable from post. We then know that the information in post is looking for this block of information. So we're basically assigning like a key pairing or sort of a name pairing with the text that then gets entered into this input. So in this input, this is the customer. So when the customer inputs their name over here, when we go to collect this information from post, we know looking up the value of customer, whatever that value might be, is going to give us Bob in this case. Same is true for address. We assign a name. The input type is text. So we just enter in some text, and then we know that, okay, the address is going to be 76 New Lane in this case. Same is true for pizza type, for toppings, etc. Then we get down to the order date. Order date, same thing. We have a name so that when we go to grab this information from post, we know what value we're looking to grab. And then we collect the type is actually a date. So that's the reason why this order date over here, when we click on it, it brings up this nice drop down so that we can then pick the date. So this is based on the browser. The browser knows that in HTML, when you want an input of date type, it drops down a little calendar so that we can then pick the date. Then the last value we do is submit. Once submit is, then all the information that's available in this form then all gets gathered and we submit it to post, and then we bring up the submit pizza order. When we go to submit pizza order, which is what we just did, again, this looks a little bit more complicated because we have a lot of checks. So we're going to walk through this step by step. So again, we have the head, the title, it's HTML. Inside the header, the name of this site is order submitted, so that again appears here. Now we're capturing the data from the HTML form. Okay, so we're creating a new variable. In PHP, whenever you create a variable, you need to put a $sign in front of it. So we put this $sign and then this variable name, and then we're using trim capture the request customer. The other way you could do this is just do capture post, like that. Both work. We capture the variable customer. We do the same thing for this address. We capture this address, the pizza type, request for toppings, request for price, request on the order date. And then we're giving order number is this random number. So we're saying we want to create a random number between the numbers 0 and essentially 1 million. So that goes to 999,999. So we're creating some 6-digit random number in between those, and that's going to be our order number. Order numbers may or may not want to do this. You may want to do something where you're just integrating or you're just adding the next number up. So you could maybe pull the number from the latest number from the database and then add 1 to it, and that would be the new order number. There's various ways of doing it. This was just the easiest way in this particular example. So we're assigning a random number, and that's going to be our order number. And then we submit these variables into a SQL query. So the SQL query right here, we just sort of walk through this. This again is the SQL command of insert into orders. For all of these different fields in the database, we're going to give it all these different values. And these values were just assigned to whatever was in the post or in the request from the form. okay, in the form request. Okay, so we grabbed the variables from the form. So anything that was in this form page was put inside. We submitted it. PHP then grabbed it from the HTML form. We assigned it unique PHP variables, and then we put it into this SQL query. Now, what we can then do is use MySQLi. So we have this MySQLi variable. This doesn't necessarily need to say MySQLi, but essentially we're saying we're creating a new MySQLi connection. We're connecting to this server. And this is my server information, but it's on a secure network behind a Docker container. So, it's just root, very secret. This could be any password, but it has to be the same password as what you set up when you installed your server. So we're connecting to that, and you can connect to this once or many times, depending on how you want to set it up. Oftentimes, this is then hidden within like a separate DB file or DB connect file. You can separate out files, and we can talk with that in section 2. But essentially, what we do is we make a connection. We then check the connection. So if the MySQLi Connect has an error, print the connection failed and what the connection error was. If that's not the case, so if this, that didn't happen, so then we just echo connected successfully to the MySQL. So you connected successfully to MySQL. This is the echo command, so it's just basically saying, okay, we are stating what we just did. We also have an echo of this query with a line break. So echo is kind of powerful because you can not only output text to the browser, but you can also output HTML code to the browser, and that's how you can actually sort of build a website based on the backend logic that happened in PHP. So this first section of echo the query, so all this information in the query, this information that we just printed here, that all got printed out in this first row, so you can see that. Then we said, okay, we connected successfully to the MySQL database. Then we select the DB, and then we have another echo, which is you selected this pizza database. Okay. Yes. So this is just doing everything very step by step. And then insert the order. So we have again an if. What this if does is it helps us make sure that we can actually query and run the MySQLi query command to the database. So this if acts as a little bit of a check. If there's a big error, we don't want to crash the site or something like that. So we have this if. We connect to this. You have successfully entered the customer pizza type into the database. So we successfully entered Bob Meat Lovers into the database. So you can see the Bob and the Meat Lovers comes from our initial query and form. So that all essentially is confirming that we actually submitted the order. Everything's hunky-dory. If there was any problem at this stage, maybe the query result or maybe the form was only partially filled in, so it didn't actually go through, or there was an error, then we would see an error over here, and we can actually try to simulate that. So say we have Bob, but we remove the address, we remove the pizza type, and then we try to submit. And it looks like we can actually submit a null value for that. So it depends on if the database can allow for it, but occasionally if there's like no allowances in the database for some sort of null value, then it would throw an error message and we would be able to see that. So obviously I gotta check how I built out that database logic. But the last field right here is this MySQLi close, which basically says we close the connection. And this is really important to make sure that you always do, so that you don't always have the connection open all the time, because you don't want your database, constantly being opened by the site. So that's essentially all it is to actually connect to the database and put information in. The next thing we want to look at is how do we get information out. So this is going to go to this site, view orders. So you can see that other customer Bob. I deleted that. Oh well. So we have Bob, and we have broccoli, and we have the other order which we just submitted. Obviously, there's a bunch of backend logic that we could do to make sure that this runs a little bit more smoothly or is somehow more interactive. You could set up different ways to add, like maybe, did I respond? Is the order closed? Is the order still open? You can add multiple layers on top of this, but at its most basic form, this is just putting the information from the database into a table in HTML. So what you can see here is, again, we have this orders page, orders over here, title. It's inside the HTML. We have our links, just like we do on the order form as well. So this is just copying the same code twice. Then we connect to the database again. Over here, we check to make sure that the connection did connect correctly. If it did not, if there was an error, then it would show there's a connection failed. Then we build out the table. So using PHP, we're just using echo. We're passing this information over. The information then creates, this is sort of the header of the table. So we define the table. We say it's aligned center, so it's in the center of the page. And the width is 80% of the web page. So you can see here it's approximately 80% on the table size. The TH in HTML stands for table header. So that's the reason why it's centered and bolded. That's just the default way in which Firefox is displaying the table. And then we create a query again. So this query is just selecting all the information from the table, or all the information from the table of the database. So select star, which basically means all, from table orders. So select star from orders is the SQL command. Again, you have a semicolon at the end of all your PHP statements. And then if, again, we're putting in a little bit of a check just to make sure that we can actually query or successfully submit the query. So if the open orders, we use this MySQLi variable to create the connection. And here we actually define the database in one step. This previous one was in 2 steps. So here in our first page, we selected where the MySQL server was, and then we did a second query to select the DB, and then we did another query to select the table, and then run the query command. What we did here is we selected the database in the first initial query, so it saves a step. Then we create a new variable, which is open orders. And this, essentially what this is going to do is we fetch the data, we create the query. Open orders then becomes this sort of relational query command. Then while, and then we're going to go row by row. So what essentially happens is when you get the whole database table, you get, all this data. All this data just comes right over to you. And then you need to break it down so that you can display it row by row by row by row. And so what the PHP does and what the most programming languages do is they'll go row first, then they go down. And we do that by running a while loop. So this while essentially lets us iterate row by row. And I named it row, but the variable name could really be anything. It's just we go row by row, MySQLi fetch associated variables in open orders. So let's break it down. We'll go row by row. And row by row, we're going to assign a PHP variable to rows, and then we're picking this particular cell or this particular value for that row. Okay, so if you have row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it just does it in the same order of the information in the database, as it's essentially put in. We're not organizing that, although you can, because you can put sort or something over here at the end of this, so you can sort by date or sort by. But here we're just saying row by row, I want the order number, the customer, the pizza type, and then you get all this information. So it just looks for, okay, in row number 0, or row number 1, row number 2, this is the order number, this is the customer, this is the pizza type, etc. Then we make this into HTML and we push it to the browser page in a language that the browser will understand. So we basically put this out into HTML and we add a new row. So this TR is table row. Notice we have a TR over here as well. And then TD is table data, or table, essentially a normal standard text or just information inside the table. So the first TD is the order number, then we have the customer, then we have the pizza type, then we have the shoppings, and we just put all these values in the same order that we created the initial structure of the table. Once all that's done, and we've iterated through all of the rows, we close the loop here. So we have this bracket and this bracket. So this while loop then closes once this bracket is assigned. Then we do one last thing to close the table. Okay, so we end the table, and this is just following standard HTML. The only difference is we're using PHP to push this HTML out to the browser. This else statement is basically just saying if there was an error while querying this database. This is coming from this if statement over here. Okay, so this is saying if we connect successfully, then we're going to go and get all this data and we're going to output it over here. If there was a problem, else, there's an error retrieving the database query, and then this will give us the MySQL query error. This is very helpful when debugging or when first setting up the website. Hopefully it should always work afterwards, unless maybe the database goes down or there was some update to the code which broke how the SQL was connecting to it or something. But essentially this is just a check to make sure there's no error, and if there is an error, it would show you what the error is. We then close the PHP with this question mark and a greater than sign. So we first start the PHP text over here. This opens the PHP, this closes the PHP, and then we close the body and we close the HTML for the web page. So that's all the page data. And what that does is this. So we have our header, the order number, the customer, the pizza type, the toppings, the price, address, order date. For every row, for every line of information inside the database, we then pull it, we display it in the proper order that we want, and then you can view the orders. So this is just a very quick introductory overview, and then we'll get into some more interesting design elements, how to make the website look a little bit more pretty, or at least has been designed better than just that text, using different types of things like maybe a selector or a checkbox or a radio button or whatever. And then you can also put this, what you see here, this table, this is also a form. It should be formatted differently using HTML and CSS. And then you can then add these things to cart, and then other things will happen. So I'm still building out this part. But I hope this was a reasonable introduction and just sort of gives everyone an idea of how you can use HTML plus PHP to connect and interact with databases, store user data, and in the next couple of lessons we'll build this out, add a little bit more logic around it so you can actually create sort of like an order form or something on your website. So hope it was helpful, and thank you very much.